Talitha cum. I say to you, little girl, arise. These past few months, there's been a lot in the media from the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, the island my mom is from, of cases, very prominent cases of femicide. Men, boyfriends, husbands murdering their spouses and girlfriends in horrific ways. It's created a lot of attention in social media and the news, and it's horrifying. In Mexico, before the pandemic, there were massive protests and sadly fringe groups that were quite violent and even very anti-Catholic, speaking out against the case of femicide in Mexico and the thousands of women that are killed, and no justice is ever given. No man is brought to justice, and their lives are ignored by the government and their death. When I worked in Miami for 13 years as a priest, we had people from all over South and Central America and the Caribbean, and the frequency with which I would hear in confession or pastoral counseling or spiritual direction of girls, now grown women, having been abused in different ways by the men in their homes or around their neighborhoods was horrifically frequent and gut-wrenching to hear over and over again. There is this cultural reality of what they say in Spanish, machismo, a form of misogyny, really, toward women. But it's not exclusive to the Hispanic culture. I mean, we see in the news the protests in India of random women just riding a bus or walking down the street and groups of men doing horrific things to them. Kids are present. And the people are trying to protest because there's just no control, no safety for women. And we can think, well, those are in third world countries, poor people, uneducated, they don't have the resources, etc. But the reality is, Puerto Rico and many capitals of South America and India, they're very, very wealthy people and very prosperous capitals and cities. And it happens here. A week doesn't go by that I'm not looking at different news apps on my phone and hear of a man murdering his wife or girlfriend and maybe taking his own life. It happens here far too frequently, and during the pandemic, it has increased the abuse of women and their killing by men. It's not exclusive to those places. It happens here all too often, all too common. Women's voices have always been second class or not interested in being heard. We have a history here in our country. I mean, women were not allowed to vote in the beginning for the first, well, it wasn't until less than 100 years ago or so, a little over 100 years ago, that women were allowed to vote. They weren't allowed to own land. I mean, it wasn't until 1988 that a federal law passed allowing women to even take out a loan without their husband or father or brother's signature. I mean, how many of us buy our cars and houses cash? You don't let a woman take out a loan, and how is she going to provide for herself and survive and provide for her family? We've been slow at the game here in this country as well. We're still fighting for equal pay, for equal work. For far too long, from the beginning of history, women have been at the short end of the stick and oftentimes been the focus of so much abuse and denigration. I mean, it started with original sin. We read in the book of Genesis, after original sin, God says to Eve, "Your urge shall be for your husband, but he will dominate you." It's not that God wanted that, but that would be a natural consequence of the rupture of their relationship with one another and with God through sin. And even Christian churches use that to further denigrate women. Well, it's the woman's fault there's original sin and sickness and death and earthquakes and fires. I mean, Eve ate the fruit. She was first. She sinned first, right? God told them not to do it, and Eve did it. And they use the scripture in a very distorted way to further denigrate women, when the reality is, before Eve even existed, God said to Adam, "Tend the garden, protect and cultivate it." It was his job to protect that garden, wherein later he placed Eve. And when this serpent, who was more intelligent and more powerful than him, entered, it was up to him to expel the serpent or even die doing so. But instead, Adam turns his back. That sin of omission was the first sin by him that led later then to Eve's sin. And we see this is true in the person of Jesus, the new Adam, who, in the face of sin and death, rather than turning his back, he gives himself head on and gives his life on the cross to protect and preserve and save his bride, us, the church, the new Adam. From the very beginning, there's been that denigration and suffering of women, and it continues today, and that's why it's so relevant that in today's gospel, Jesus heals two women, a girl and a woman. It's exclusively focused on the woman when, as we know, the scriptures were written in a very patriarchal society. Even the prayers of our church, I'm very much aware of the fact that they're always in the masculine. And I'm not getting into the politics of gender neutral pronouns or whatever. I believe in what the church teaches. I made that profession when I was ordained a deacon, a priest, and renewed it when I had to teach at the seminary. And I'm sincere about it, but it's just a fact. Our prayers are all in the masculine, and the only people that preach at Mass are men. And I'm very much aware of that. But here in the gospel, Jesus heals two women. First, we see Jairus pleading on behalf of his daughter, like a good father should and would. My daughter is at the point of death. Please come and heal her. And Jesus is surrounded by thousands of people. He's already healing people right there. He's attending to the scribes and Pharisees and the leaders of the church, the synagogue, and the government. And Jesus stops everything, and he leaves everyone to heal that one little girl. He leaves them all behind to heal that one little girl who has no rights, who cannot vote, whose voice doesn't matter. In the New Testament, it took the witness of two men to both testify to something for it to be a fact. Remember, even in the gospel, when Mary Magdalene sees Jesus risen from the dead and she runs to the apostles to tell them he is risen, they don't believe her. But two men run to the tomb to verify it as fact, Peter and John. And only then, he is risen. Her witness didn't matter. They didn't believe it because she was a woman, and that was the culture and the time. I don't know how much has changed since then. I'll let you speak to that. But for this little girl, Jesus goes. She matters to him. But on the way, we hear this woman who Mark connects the two. She's 12 years old and dying. Here's this grown woman hemorrhaging for 12 years. Now this blood flow from her in that culture and that religion at that time rendered her unclean. Anything she touched was unclean. No one could touch her, hug her, shake her hand, her mom give her a kiss, and not be made unclean. She couldn't enter the temple to pray because she was unclean. When people approached her, she had to yell out, unclean, like the lepers. She was not just bleeding for 12 years, she was completely cut off from family, friends, affection, and worship. But her faith was so strong, even after suffering greatly at the hand of many doctors, all male, who only made things worse. She approaches Jesus and touches his cloak. With that faith, if I can only just touch his cloak, it's Jesus, I can be healed. And immediately the blood flow stopped and she was cured of her affliction. And Jesus, aware immediately that power had gone out of him, said, who touched my clothes? She was filled with fear because she was a woman who was unclean and touched a rabbi. Forbidden. But Jesus wasn't angry, because nothing can make him unclean. He is the source of purity and life and love and goodness. When anyone touches Jesus, we are made clean with the faith of this woman. And so, filled with fear, she's trembling. She throws herself on the ground and tells Jesus the whole truth, a powerful image of confession. And Jesus wants to know who touched him, because it's not enough just to fix the problem. It's not enough just to heal her, men. He wants to be in relationship with her. Daughter, your faith has saved you. You are my daughter. You are one of us. Welcome back home to the family. It's not just that you're no longer bleeding. You're home now. You're my daughter. We are in relationship with one another. As women today, oftentimes we can feel ignored by men, by Jesus, by God. Negative experiences with our fathers, experiences of abuse, physical, mental, emotional, or other, with kids present. I won't go into detail. We can experience feeling cut off. We can experience, like her, being completely isolated and alone, and nothing matters anymore. And Jesus not only wants to heal us and can heal you, but he wants to have a relationship with you. If only we touch the cloak of Jesus in confession. But then the daughter comes into the picture, Jairus' daughter. And before he's even at the house, the officials come to tell the friends and family of the synagogue official come to tell him, she's already dead, don't bother the teacher anymore. All he can do is heal her. Only God can raise the dead, so leave him alone. We can hear that voice in our head. Leave Jesus alone. He can't help you anymore. It's too late. Maybe we feel completely lost. We're mourning the agony alone of a miscarriage, or having been in horrific circumstances that led us to the profoundly regrettable decision of having an abortion. And we hear in our voice, "Don't trouble the teacher anymore. You're already dead." We may be going through mental illness, either because of or separate from an experience of abuse or addiction. And we hear those voices, "Don't bother Jesus anymore. You're already dead." Well, if he was just a healer, it's true. Why bother? But Jesus told the synagogue official and you and I today, do not be afraid. Just have faith, like the woman with the hemorrhage. Because before Jesus, there is no death, only a temporary sleep. He raises the dead. And so he continues on, and the synagogue official follows his lead, not the voices in his head telling him don't bother anymore. And he goes into the room with just Peter, James, and John because he doesn't want to make a spectacle. He brings his most intimate core of apostles, the three that he called to be with him at the Transfiguration and at the Garden of Olives when he was suffering and sweating drops of blood in agony, anticipating his passion and death. And with the two parents, there's this powerfully intimate moment. The little girl is lifeless. The people laugh at him. He says, she's not dead, she's asleep. Well, no, she was dead. Physically, she was dead. The people knew that. That's why they ridiculed him. But Christ knows that before him, who is the resurrection and the life, there is no death. He has conquered death. Death no longer has its sting or victory. And so he puts them all out, as we're called to do with those voices that tell us it's too late. You're ridiculous to think this. You have no hope. He puts them all out. And only with his intimate friends and the mother and father of the little girl, he does something that was forbidden for a Jew to do. He touched the body of a corpse, rendering himself normally unclean. Even today in Israel, when there are these horrific bombings and Jewish people and others are killed, there are special people that go, that are Orthodox Jews, to recover the bodies and the parts, because they would be rendered unclean to pick that up. And even then as well, he touches the corpse of this little girl, forbidden. And he says, Talitha kum, the Aramaic, the original language that Jesus spoke, literally meaning, little girl, I say to you, get up. It's translated to the Greek in Mark's gospel, and so the translation for get up in Greek is arise. It has that double meaning of both physical resurrection and spiritual resurrection, final resurrection. Little girl, I say to you, arise. He says that to each one of you, especially the women among us who have felt dead, ignored, forgotten, second class, who suffer from what they've experienced, even when they come to church and hear so many masculine pronouns. It can be very difficult. Who feel ignored or swept up in the politics of abortion and forgotten in miscarriage, or having forgotten in the midst of miscarriages, or have experienced other forms of abuse. Little girl, I say to you, arise. Jesus reaches out his hand and lifts her up. He goes to her and leaves behind all the important people and adults, because only she matters. Only you matter to Jesus. And they were utterly astounded. He gave strict orders not to tell anyone this and tells them, give her something to eat. This isn't a spiritual resurrection. She is truly risen from the dead, body and soul. Give her something to eat. She's hungry. Today, Jesus calls you forth. Little one, arise. He calls you to these steps where he will come to us body, blood, soul, and divinity. And we will have a chance not just to touch the tassel of his robe, but God grant us the faith of the woman with hemorrhages to touch his very body. If he can heal her of that just by touching his clothes, what can he heal us of if we touch his very body? The body of Christ. For us men, we see in Jairus and Jesus the model of what it means to be a man. That the needs of our little girls and the women in our lives, no matter how great or small, must be utterly important to us. We must fight for them and plead for them and do whatever we have to do to honor them, to care for them, to provide for them, to protect them, and to keep them healthy and safe. Their lives and their suffering matters, and everything should stop to honor them and their needs, just as it did for Jairus, just as it did for Jesus. But even we too have been wounded and are hurting and have felt forgotten and can be suffering from similar experiences, all the same that I just described. To all of us today, Jesus in the Eucharist tells us, Talitha cum, little one, I say to you, get up. And he invites us not to touch the tassel of his robes, but to embrace his very body and to experience the power of his healing or resurrection that no regular healer can do, but only Jesus, who is God and man. Little girl, I say to you, arise. Do not be afraid. Just have faith.